Hello and welcome to Worlds Together. Tonight we're going to be talking about developing timelines for your world and your world building and all the stuff that entails and what kind of things you should think about and all the ins and outs of world building timelines. So, let's start by talking about some things to think about when you're developing timelines in your world. And then we're actually going to do a timeline for the world we've been building. So we'll get to practice it. But first, we're going to talk about it. So, timelines. So if you're doing world building, you're building a campaign world or a setting, and you want to really flesh it out, your setting needs to have some type of history. You have to have some background there, or it's going to feel really flat. Now, it doesn't have to be incredibly detailed, though it can be, and the more detailed it is, the more alive your world is going to feel. But you will want to have some kind of history. So one thing we want to talk about is how many timelines are you going to have? So that depends. But normally, if you're doing a whole world, you're going to end up with more than one timeline. And why is that? Well, it's because different cultures are going to put different things on their timeline because different things are going to be important to them. Even the same events may appear in different places on their timeline because their calendar or their timeline, their year zero, may be different from other cultures because the important event for them wasn't the important world-changing event for somebody else. So you will likely have several timelines when you're building a world, a whole world, and fleshing it out. But just start with one. Start with one and then build out from there. Start with a main timeline of things that you know have happened in your world, and then start modifying those for other timelines of other cultures and races and locations once you get the first one kind of down. How long is your timeline? So usually what I'll do with a timeline is once I figure out a year zero event, I'll start at year zero. Even if I don't know what the actual event is, I'll just have a year zero, and then I'll decide how long before or after the year I want my first campaign to run. So in the case of Tranit's Rest, I had decided that I want my campaign to be about 200 years after the year zero event. So I'm going to go from year zero up 200 years because after that is future. But how far back am I going to go before year zero? Well, that depends on how old you want your world to be. In the case of Tranit's Rest, the world of Coimbar is ancient. So I may go back thousands of years. Now, does that mean I'm going to put timeline events in for every year for thousands of years? No. We're just going to hit the highlights to start out with, and then things will start fleshing out as you start building the world and stuff. But you need to kind of decide where your outside parameters are so that you can start knowing where to fill things in so it doesn't feel completely bare. So year zero events. So should you have them, and how many of them should you have? Well, so for instance, in our world, for Western culture, the year zero event was the birth of Jesus. So that eventually became where the calendar split from year zero. Okay, that was the world-changing event that Western civilization decided was going to be the time. Yes, I know there's all kinds of debates about was that actually the correct time, and no, probably not. And so now it's BCE instead of BC, and stuff and calculations and things and junk and stuff. But the simple fact of the matter is that's the event where people decided to set the beginning of the calendar time. and then go forward and back from that. So, in your world, I would recommend having at least one year zero event. You're going to have a year zero somewhere. If it's at the beginning of your timeline, that's fine. The world was created at year zero. Fine. But that's your year zero event. So you got to have at least one. You may, in fact, have more than one, even on the same timeline. So it's easy to imagine that the year zero event for humans may be completely different than the year zero event for elves, because they're in, maybe in completely different parts of the world. They've got completely different timelines, because what humans consider important and elves consider important are completely different. So their year zero world changing event would likely be different. So that's two different year zero events on two different timelines. However, you may have two year zero events on this, or two or more on the same timeline. So for instance, and it gets a little weird, but you can do it. So for instance, in Tranit's Rest, we've got this year zero event where a power-hungry necromancer did something wrong and broke magic. So that's a world-changing event, and so that's going to be our year zero event. I could also have another year zero event 1,000 years before that, where a cataclysmic some kind of cataclysmic event caused magic to exist in the first place. So in that case, what I'm going to end up with is 2 year zero events and 3 epochs. So I've got the stuff before magic existed. I've got the stuff from when magic existed until Tranit broke it, and then the stuff after Tranit broke it. So, you may or may not want to have all those as year zero events, and part of the history could be, like in the real world, that there was a calendar and it got adjusted when a new cataclysmic event started, and that's the new year zero event. So timelines, when you put them together, if you're going to use them for world building, are really a reflection of cultural beliefs. So when you're putting the timeline together, the things that appear on it are going to be very heavily influenced by what the culture is and what their what they give importance to. So for instance, in the human calendar, we've got the year zero event where the necromancer broke magic. But in the elvish timeline, that may not even be an event, because where the magic was broken is a certain part of the world that doesn't really affect the elves. They're in a very different part of the world. So they may not even care about that event on their timeline. When they look at their history, their chronicles, they may not even care about that. But it's fundamental to where the humans are in their kingdoms. So it's going to be a big deal. Even if they cared about that, even if the elves did care about that event or it affected them, it wouldn't likely be their year zero event, and they're going to put it at less prominence than other things in their timeline. So if you zoom out of their timeline, the big bold things may not include that. Their highlights don't include that thing. It was a thing that happened, but it's not a big deal. On the human timeline, big deal, big bold letters, year zero event. So when you're developing the timelines, part of making the history more real in your world is to think about what the culture is like that's developing this particular timeline, because you're likely going to have several if you're doing a whole campaign world. So the events on the timeline, are they going to be fact or fiction? Well, they could be either or sometimes both. So let's talk about what we mean by that. So if you're looking for a factual timeline, you can do that, but remember that timelines in history really has a lot to do, the stories of history have a lot to do with cultural beliefs and the importance cultures place on different things. So for instance, the Lincoln assassination is a fact. There were witnesses, there's documentation, we know what day it happened, what time it happened, how it happened, who did it. That is a fact. It happened on this day at this time, period, on the timeline. That's it. There's no debates about whether that actually happened, right? That's a fact on the timeline. Robin Hood, on the other hand, is largely a fiction on the timeline. And when Robin Hood happened, hey, Fairy Bard, when Robin Hood happened is largely based on which culture you'd be talking to. Because the Robin Hood stories have spanned, what, 700 or 800 years and have changed over time. So that's an example of a fiction that does show up on a timeline, or can, because it's such an ingrained part of cultural belief. And then the Trojan War from the Iliad. So until the late 19th century, the Trojan War was thought to be pure fiction. Then archaeologists actually discovered Troy. And then they started thinking, okay, well, maybe, so there was this place called Troy. Was there actually a Trojan War? Well, as over the next 100 years, as they found more and more and did more digging at Troy, they discovered that there actually was a Trojan War. So what was initially thought to be a legend blip on the timeline turned out to be a factual blip. But the way that came down through the ages is that when Homer wrote the Iliad, it was a poem, an epic poem, and it described real events, but then took license with how he described them because he was being poetic. So, for instance, the Trojan War really happened. Most people agree, most scholars agree that that was a thing that happened. It was for real. Was there a Trojan horse? Probably not. Was there subterfuge to get the Greeks inside the city of Troy? Probably. So this is one of those events that's kind of a mixed bag of fact and fiction. And the actual dating of that event is still a little up in the air. So you may have on different timelines something like an Elven Dwarvish War from an ancient Elven Dwarvish War showing up at different places on the timeline. And if it was a long war, it may be that, you know, the dwarves didn't consider it started until this, but the elves consider it started 30 years earlier. Because elves, you know, pointy-eared weirdos and all. Anyway, so that's kind of a thing that you should think about when you're putting a timeline together for a culture is, are there going to be a lot of factual things? There probably will be, especially in the more recent past. Are there going to be a lot of fictional things that represent the stories of the culture? For instance, Thor is born. Thor has this event. Loki kills Balder. These are obviously fictions, but do they show up on the timeline because they are such an important part of that culture that they're part of their history? So those are things you can think about to help make your timelines more living and more deep. And it also helps to, when you're DMing stuff like this, if you've got that timeline, you can start referencing things and make the world seem alive because it has a history. behind it. In fact, it has several histories depending on the culture you're dealing with. And obviously, when you're putting your timeline together, what you're looking for is opportunities for adventure. So if I have an event that happens, one of the things I want to be thinking about is, hey, could I ever make an adventure out of this? Could I ever set a campaign or a one-shot in this time frame so that the players become part of this historical event? So I just wanted to go through a fairly quick kind of overview of things that I think about when I'm doing timelines and things that have bearing on that. It's more than just throwing some dates around. It's thinking about how the cultures think about their own timelines. So let us actually go do some stuff. So here's what we're going to do. Let me get my mic out of the frame. That would be good. See my nice pink mic, ain't it purty? So let's see here. We'll get on to World Anvil. And we're going to actually do some timeline-y stuff. And you guys get to help me. You get to brainstorm some history here. So we're taking a look at Coenbar, the thing we've been developing. We know that Coenbar is an ancient world, so we're gonna take a look first at the map because we want to get an idea of what we're dealing with as far as where we want to go. So where we want the timeline to be centered. So this will give you an idea of kind of what I was talking about with different timelines in your world. For instance, the elves are primarily over in this area. This is their ancestral home, Kith-Laraneth. They are not going to be as concerned with things that happen over here in the human kingdom of Caer Branath as the people that are right around here. So the timelines for these kingdoms will probably be relatively similar, although they could be different, but they'll be relatively similar, whereas timelines from people way over here are going to be significantly different from that. So the area we're going to be concentrating on for timelines is, first, the kingdom of Caer Branath is our main setting. So this kingdom, and here are the Waken lands where Tranit blew up magic. So this has a direct impact on this kingdom. So what I want to do is have a look at creating a timeline for this kingdom. This is a primarily human kingdom, founded by humans anyway, but it is going to be kind of it's the big kingdom in the world. It's the primary one. It's the Sword Coast of Coenbar. So, the world's largest city will exist in this kingdom, and it is going to be the melting pot place for everyone. So, let's take a look at some chronicles, and we're going to start a new timeline here. So we'll create a new timeline, and we will call this the history of that is our year 0 event. That is the epoch dividing line, is that event. So we're going to make the history of this kingdom. Okay? Now this kingdom is fairly old as well. So this is going to be the history of the kingdom of Caer Branath. And we're going to... I'm not sure that there's any advanced... Yeah, this is a normal timeline. We don't have a calendar yet. We'll make one of those later. No articles or categories related at this point. So, we're going to create this timeline. Alright. which is at this point empty. So what we want to do is edit the time. Nope, not that. Add an era to the timeline. So era title. So our year 0 event, this is where we're going to define what the epics are called. So like BC and AD stuff, or BCE and ACE, or whatever they... That wasn't a thing when I was a kid, but it's a thing now. Anyway, this is where we define what that's called. So prior to the year 0 event, it's going to be before the awakening, because that event, I think the best way to call that event is the awakening, because that's when the inanimate objects were awakened and magic was broken. So we could call it the breaking, but I don't know. I'm just kind of partial to awakening, so we'll go with that for now. So this is the epic before Tranit blew up magic and awakened the inanimate objects. So the abbreviation, BA Baracus. Are we doing the 18 here? Cool. The end date is going to be 0, because that's when it ticks over, right? And the start date, well, this basically is, when did the history of Kharbraneth start? So it's going to be, let's just decide how old this kingdom is. So we're going to set the first campaign 200 years after this event. And let's say that the kingdom has lasted about 1,000 years. So we're going to be looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of 800-ish years before. I don't want to do round numbers because that seems a little contrived. So let's say it was founded in let's say 764 BA. We'll see how that does. So before the awakening, boom, there we go. Yeah, the founding of the kingdom and the founding of the primary religion. Now, at some point, we'll kind of want to do a master timeline that kind of brings all these things together. So the founding of Kharbraneth will be something on the timeline that's a much bigger timeline, so that we can kind of put all these things in perspective with each other, because the founding of the Elvish kingdoms is obviously probably going to be a lot older than that. All right, so now we want to add an era to this that is after the awakening. So there are any really cool names we could call that besides after awakening, or should we just go with that for now and make our lives simple? After Tranit broke the stuff. So this will be AA, after awakening, unless you guys have a better date. Start date 0, and the end date is going to be, I mean, we're looking at 200-ish years afterwards for our first campaign, but we could go beyond that. We could see, I may set my first campaign 200 years after, but we may make a history that spans the next 500 years, so that another campaign or adventure can be set in some future date after the things that the players do have happened, so that they feel like they're part of the history, which is fun. So why don't we just go ahead and make this, well, since this is Kharbraneth, let's just make it 243, and that's the year that we're going to be starting in our thing. The end date will be considered the most recent date. Yes, that is true. Yes. No. We begin counting at 0. No. We begin counting at 1. Because there actually isn't a year 0. Nope, that's not the first era. This is the current era of the world. And, okay. So let's see how this goes. Did I click the button? Alright. Alright, so I need to fix this because I did this, the advanced options. We got to get this has the inverted dates. It's the first era of the world. Okay, so that should fix it, I think. I've done this backwards. I mean, those are correct, but... Oh! Never mind. It's stacked up. It's okay. It's fine, chat. It's fine, chat. Don't worry about it. Okay, so we've got the... We've got that, so now we want to have... we've got the timeline. We want some events. So our first event is not the sacking of Rome. It is going to be the Great Awakening. And it's going to be our year 0. So, yeah, it had me a little flummoxed too. It was kind of, but it's sitting from bottom to top instead of top to bottom. So, do we want a specific time for this month and day? I think there's going to be some reason that he has to do this some special day that he has to do this ritual on that he screws up. So we're gonna make it probably some kind of planetary arrangement or solstice or something like that. I mean, in ancient humanity, solstices were extremely important for magics and things like that. So, but let's say we're in a, and we haven't even really created a calendar for this world, but I'm going to use the I'm going to base this on regular human calendar, because if we go too far with this right now, we'll get just very confused. So let's just say Halloween. Sounds good to me, right? Sure. Significance. This is era changing. This is our big event. It is a era beginning end. It's on this timeline, and you can actually add these to more timelines, so that's cool. But let's see if I can put a link in here. I can, yay. So Tranit has what do you call when a ritual? What did he do to the ritual? He screwed it up? No, you don't screw it up. He failed the ritual? No, he... Wow. You'd think that would be simple. Botched? Sure, we'll go with that. Botched the ritual, and fabric of magic and awakened the inanimate. Alright, so we can get very detailed here, but we don't really need to. We just want the highlights. Articles, locations. We haven't done the location yet, so can't tag it yet. We'll come back to that. Secret information, we're not going to go there yet. That's later when we start building the actual campaign. So we're going to create this entry. So now, if we were to go look at the timeline, we have, oh, I put that in there twice. Oh, and because I put it as year 0, it's showing up in both the before and the after. So we're going to want to have, we're going to want to do a little bit differently than that. So let us go to the timeline. We shall edit the timeline. I want to edit this and put it in year 1. Okay, so I think that will fix it. Yes. Okay. So now we've got our year 1 event. And we've got a link to the person who did it, and that's all the stuff. So now we want to start thinking about what other things happened in our kingdom. So obviously the founding of the kingdom is one of the things we're going to want. So I want historical events. Our Brenneth founded. And that is going to be so let me pick, I think we go negative here. So negative, what did I say, 8, oh, I can't remember what the thing was, but it doesn't really matter. So 823. I'm not going to worry about months that far back. So this is a, if you see it, just shout it out, chat. Little life. It's political event. It is in fact a political event. Yep, sounds good to me. It's on that timeline. And I'll just say it's founded. Now, we haven't come up with really the story of Cair Brenneth, but we'll get there. That's all good. Okay, good. Now, I can't actually remember if you want to go negative on that or not, so we're going to take a look back at the timeline and see how that done did. No, that went the wrong. Negative 1588. No, that went the right way, but that's not the date I was looking for. Let's here, because probably see what that does. We'll get it. Don't worry, chat. We'll get it. Got this. History of Cair Brenneth. Oh, so see, this went on the wrong side of the timeline. So, oh. I think I know where it's gone here. So, if we look at the timeline itself, it's eras. It doesn't tell me what the start. So before the after the awakening. So how far out did we go with that? We went to 243. All right. UTD. So that is from yeah, so I do need to do that negative, I think. So anyway, we'll get that figured out. I'm not going to worry about that right now, chat, because we can fix it. So, we've got a founding. We've got the Great Awakening, our Year Zero event. So, what other things are going to happen in the history of this kingdom? What kinds of neat, important things could happen? Like a first war. The First Great War. That could be pretty early, I would say. So negative, let's say 784. Sure. When was Tranit born? Okay, we could do that. I actually do 1212. National important. The type is a war. Military action. Yep. Timelines there. And go. Alright, so let's take a look at because there's a little bit different way you can do that for Tranit. So if we go to our character entry for Tranit and we edit this, do a quick edit. Yeah, that was not goody. I don't want a quick edit, I want the full edit. Thank you. Alright, so we go to somewhere in here is his birthday, and it'll actually link onto that. Year of birth. So we'll display the current age if you set up your world's current date. So the world's current date, let's get this straightened out, is date and time. Current year let's call it 226. And I'm not going to worry about that. So this is a global, worldwide era. So this is kind of the top level BC AD thing. What we set up before was what Caer Branneth calls those things, which happen in this case to be the same, but the kingdom could have different names if they have a different year zero event. Alright, so we're going to save the changes here. We shall go back to Tranit. Edit him. And when was it in? One of these. Oh, it's right here. Alright, so I want him to be about 160 years old. He's really old human, because, you know, necromancer, stealing life, all that kind of stuff. So he's going to be, his birth date is obviously going to be 160 BA, because he's the one that caused all that crap. So, didn't put it on that timeline though. Do I have him on a timeline? Okay. I'll have to really research how to do that directly, but timelines. Hello. Thank you. Historical events. Okay. Yep, birth of Tranit. That's going to be minus 160, and we will say, so here's maybe a fun thing. We'll say that he was born the same day that the ritual takes place on, because why not? Life birth on this history. And I think that'll be good. Alright, so now take a look at the timeline and see what things are looking like. Alright, so I've gone... Oh, this is counting up from... Okay. Alright, chat, this is a little weird. I'll have to straighten the dates out. They're going kind of backwards right now because of the way I'm doing the negatives and where we put the begin dates for the BA beginning of the world stuff, but don't worry, we'll straighten it out. Just pretend this is upside down from this. So, we've got a birth of Tranit. Obviously, he died here. That was the whole event. That's where he died. So, let's see. So let's have... What other kinds of things, major things, would we want on a timeline? I mean, obviously we could put 1,000 things on here, but you want to start with the big ones, because you can always go back and fill in more detail as you're building adventures and stuff. So... good one. Crown the current monarch. What do you call it when a ruler's crowned? Crowning, but they have a coronation. There you go. Thank you. We'll want to change the name of this when we decide what the name of the current monarch is, but... So let's say this dude's been in power. Alright, well here's the thing. If we want our current... So our first... the first campaign, do we want this kingdom to be pretty stable at this point in its history, or do we want it to be unstable? Because if we have a king that has just been coronated in the past couple of years, it's going to be a fairly unstable kingdom, most likely, because change of ruler is usually a stability kick. Or do we want an old, wizened ruler on the throne at this point that's been around for a while? Could be a regency, yeah. The Uller. I just decided what I wanted to call this guy. Thank you, Fairy Bard. We'll call him Uller. I liked it. Happy accidents. Alright, so Uller Tabardic is... So let's see, he was coronated. Let's say he's a fairly wizened ruler. We won't start with political instability because we're going to have enough other stuff to deal with in the first campaign. So, and political intrigue and instability is quite a job to get going. So, let's say he was maybe 30-ish years ago, so 205, because we said, well, okay, 20-ish years ago. Well, we'll just see. And the coronations always happen in the spring, let's say. Okay, so we're gonna say April Fool's Day. They always happen on April Fool's Day. How fun is that? That's obviously a national importance. And what is this going to be? I mean, it's a political event. Could be also a religious event. Coronations in medieval Europe were religious events, but I think this is going to be the best thing for it. Hey, I like that. That little historical entry came to life pretty quick. Alright, so... yeah, all my negative dates are weird. Let's see, what else could we do? We could do... well, I mean, the death of the prior king... but... Alright, so we'll do that. Death of... oh. What if Uller is actually the surname of the kings, and so their second name is their given name? And then you can tell the line of king succession just by their first name. I like that. That sounds kind of different. He is our Uller. How about that for a name? That's a mouthful, isn't it? So let's see, his death would be maybe the summer of the year before. So 7-ish on, we'll just say 14th of, do you remember what year I put for that? Do you even remember what year I put for that? I think I put 20. Say 204. We'll fix it if we need to. National importance. Life, death. It's all right. We'll fix it. It's fine, chat. On this timeline, we'll create that, and then we'll just take a quick peeky peek. 205. I missed it by a year. No, I didn't. I actually got it right. Oh, look at that. All right. So now, if we look at our timeline, we'll see how this thing is shaping up. Yeah, it's going down here too. So I'll get the dates all fixed up and show you next time. Don't worry, chat. I'll fix it. Don't worry. It's fine, chat. It's fine, chat. But so I'm already starting to see. We're starting to define some rulers in here, some NPCs. So we've got some NPCs we can build out. We've got a historical event prior to the Great Awakening where we could place a campaign that has something to do with this first Great War that involved Kharbraneth and other things for reasons that we don't need to define now. But hey, there was a Great War early in the history. We could set some stuff there. We could, in fact, go to the future of this and put some events in that maybe we want to set things in the future, but I'm not going to worry about that right now because it's going to take long enough to get this campaign together without thinking about the next campaign or the possibilities of the next campaign. We could, however, think about the potential of time travel for things in a campaign. So I mean, that's a little weird, but we've got broken magic here, so who knows? Things could happen. Anyway, so let's take a look at this thing laid out on the main page. So I like that World Anvil does these like era events and birth, death, coronation, political events, wars. I think it's really kind of cool that they put all this stuff together like this and make it look really nice. If I get the dates straightened out, which I will do, I think it'll look better. But this is, I mean, you can kind of see that. So if I was building a timeline for the elves way over there in the western part of the world, this stuff wouldn't appear on there because they don't care when this guy died and then this guy was coronated unless they're in some kind of close political ties with them. They're not, unless they're involved in this first Great War, it's not going to be that big a blip on their timeline. And they may not even care about this, or it's not as big a deal to them because they're not right next to it and they're not really suffering the effects of it because it's more of a localized disturbance in things. So for Kharbraneth, that event changed the world. For the elves, yeah, it happened, but so not their problem, not really a major part of their history. So you can see as you're building up timelines in a entire world of campaign, you want to think about, I've got this idea in my head of how this thing is going to go in this campaign. Well, yeah, not in my backyard. So, other races, other parts of the world may not care about some of these things, even big things like breaking magic. So you want to think about those things when you're putting timelines together. Start with one timeline. Start with bringing out the stuff that you've got in your head about, here's some big events, and now I'm going to start building out the timeline for this kingdom and put some events there, and I'm going to start thinking about when different characters were born and died, important characters, and just build out from there. And then when you get into, well, this timeline's starting to get a little crowded because I've got things in here for Kingdom of Braneth and for the Elven kingdoms, and for what happened with the orcs, and for start breaking those up into separate timelines, and then have a master timeline to tie them to, and that have kind of the high points on the master timeline. Then you can kind of control all this stuff and let it build organically. And don't think that you have to put all these timelines together all up front. This is going to be a huge work in progress. As stories come out of these things, I'll think of something that hey, what happened with this guy? Well, this guy came from this family that came from this thing that had a part in this war, and so now I've got to put this war on the timeline. So all kinds of things like that'll happen. Also, don't be afraid to just jump in and throw something on the timeline like the First Great War. No idea what that is, but that's an adventure right there. And because it's sitting there on the timeline, I can always come back later and say, hey, let's set an adventure or set a campaign 800 years in the past before these events happen, and let's start examining a campaign from the standpoint of what was the history of the things I was playing last time. Or go the other way. Now my characters are part of the history of this world. Which is another cool thing that could be done, is once the campaign is over, keep track of when their characters do major things and add those to the timeline on the world building. Because then your players are going to be really thrilled that they're actually a written part of this world. Their character is in there. And I mean, how cool is that? So, hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you've been enjoying this series. I have really been enjoying this series, and I'm still, kicking around ideas for topics and stuff. So if you ever have any topic ideas or suggestions, please make sure you throw them somewhere. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Twitch. I'm all over the place. Discord too. You can join the Discord and throw things in there. Or you could follow this world on World Anvil with a free World Anvil account and keep up with all the stuff here, and then you can just look at it, you can make suggestions for it, you can use all the stuff, because I'm just making all this available because why not? You guys are helping me build it, you should be able to use it, right? So hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for hanging out and chatting. I hope you have a great week and a fantastic Christmas. Please make sure to mash all the buttons and ding all the bells on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Twitch. And until next time, game on.